Welcome to the Cluey Podcast, where we help conscious consumers like you get clued into the latest conscious tips, topics, and brands from impact-driven founders to experts and thought leaders on the topic at hand. I'm your host, Maryclaire, founder of Cluey. Let's get Cluey'd in. Today's topic, can fashion have a sustainable future? To discuss this, our guest today is Sandra Capponi. And I can't even believe that we have her on the podcast because she is the co-founder of Good on You, the world's leading source for fashion brand impact ratings. Good on You empowers consumers with information on how their favorite fashion brands are impacting the world around us through its first of its kind rating system that uses over 500 data points to measure how fashion brands specifically impact people, the planet, and animals. Good on You's ratings also serve as a data input within Cluey's platform, which aggregates best-in-class data from sources like Good on You and elsewhere on brand impacts for everyday brands. We're so excited to welcome Sandra to the podcast, as Good on You was a huge part of our inspiration to getting Cluey started, and it has definitely led the conversation on how the fashion industry specifically needs to embrace more sustainable practices. Sandra, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be talking to you too. Our collaboration is so important to our work, and I'm keen to have this conversation. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we are so happy to have you. And, I really want to understand, because you started Good on You back in 2016, and you've been at this for quite some time. So what inspired you ultimately to start Good on You, and how did that journey begin?
Yeah, well, like you said, it was a number of years ago now, and we really noticed a trend, a consumer trend of more and more people wanting to shop sustainably, wanting to shop more consciously, but not knowing how or where to start, either because brands weren't talking about these issues that much, or if they were, it was in a really confusing way. And so people were looking for information they could understand and trust. For most of my career, I worked in the corporate sector, where I guess I got to see the good and the bad behind the scenes of big business. And I started to think about what it would take to get business to focus on the big issues that consumers cared about, and how to tap into consumer sentiment around these issues to actually drive businesses to change for the better. And personally, I felt very motivated by this idea of supporting businesses doing good, of spending money on businesses doing good, and we're starting to make some big changes in my shopping habits. And then I had the fortune of meeting my co-founder, Gordon, who was already working on the first version of Good on You, basically on this idea of a brand rating system, like you said, that would take all the complex sustainability issues in supply chains and turn that into a simple rating that consumers could understand and act on. And so we decided to join forces and take Good on You to the next level. When we launched the first version of our app back in 2015, we had something like 10,000 downloads in less than 10 days. So we knew we were onto something. And since then, it feels like we've been running just to keep up with the demand from consumers, to rate more brands, to help them make better choices. And we're really buoyed by this purpose, or this mission, this opportunity that we see to use people power to change industries to be more sustainable.
That's amazing. And, there are so many industries, obviously, that are in need of reform today. Pollution, waste, unethical treatment of workers is sadly common across more than just the fashion industry. But Good on You decided to focus specifically on fashion. Why is that?
Well, I've always loved fashion. I'm sure many people can relate. I mean, we all wear clothes. It's something that's really tied to our identity. It makes us look and feel good. And I've always had a special interest in how clothes were actually made. My mum's first job in Australia when she migrated here over 50 years ago was actually at a knitting factory just down the road. So I've always had this special connection to the industry and the origins and all the hands and that touch fashion in fashion production. But it was actually events like the Rana Plaza collapse that made me really shocked and stop and think about the impact of fashion. I'm not sure if you know much about it, but
please, if you don't mind sharing for our followers who might not be familiar with that event, I think that's a great one to let folks know about.
It's a really tragic story. Over 1,000 people died making clothes because the factory they were operating in was so unsafe. Their working conditions were so unsafe that the building literally collapsed around them. And it's not even the first time that it had happened, and it's since happened again. And it just points to one of the underlying issues in fashion, that production occurs in some of the poorest places in the world, and workers there aren't even guaranteed safe and fair conditions. And at the time, there was a huge uproar in the media and a real swell of consumer activity and action against big fashion brands who weren't doing enough to protect people and protect the environment. And it made me realize that there were lots of other people like me that cared about these issues, that wanted to do something about it, and that there was a real consumer movement that we could tap into to change the industry.
Sure. Well, no, I appreciate you. I appreciate you kind of shedding some of your own insight onto that. And, I think your proximity to the industry and to the story and founding Good on You with your co-founders is really so inspiring. But thinking about kind of obviously certain incidents that make worldwide headlines, but there are common things that are just happening every day, day in and day out, particularly in the fashion industry. So I'd love, if you don't mind, kind of educating our listeners today on the podcast. What are some of the ugliest truths about the fashion industry that our listeners should know about?
There's a few, I'm afraid to say. Fashion has been reported as one of the most polluting industries in the world. Most recently recorded as being responsible for over 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Wow. And when you think about all the other industries in the world, that's a lot. It's often surprising to people how much energy and resources goes into the production of fashion. And even things like water and chemicals, there is so much that is thrown into the very beginning of the supply chain, from growing cotton crops right through to dyeing and treating fabrics. There's a statistics around how many gallons of water it takes, up to 10,000, litres of water to produce just one pair of jeans. And wow, that's enough for one person to survive off for almost 10 years. So it's a huge amount of water, and that's just one of the inputs in a really long, complex supply chain. The other major issue is around fashion waste. So fast fashion is a new way of fashion production. That means we're making, producing and disposing of clothes faster than ever before. And it's inevitable that this results in just more and more textile waste. Again, the statistics, 92 million tonnes of textile waste is created every year. And because most of it is either synthetic materials or not natural fibres on their own, they're blended materials, it means that very little clothing is recycled. So most of it literally ends up in landfill.
Wow.
There's even a new trend of ultra fast fashion that is speeding up the production of fashion and reducing the price of fashion even further. So it's only adding to this huge problem of waste. And of course, we've touched on the human element, the exploitation of workers. Sadly, millions of workers in global supply chains, often in countries like China and Bangladesh, and often impacting women. So there's lots of ugly truths, sadly. At Good on You, we also look at animal impact. It's an issue that we know is really important to consumers, and millions of animals are killed every year just for the fashion industry. There's a perception that fashion animal products are tied to the food industry. are waste from the food industry, but that's often not true. And very few fashion brands are actually focused on or have any policies around protecting animal welfare.
Wow. And that's particularly interesting that you say that, because I do think when it comes to animal impacts, I mean, humans are in many ways considered to be stewards, or we should ideally be stewards of the planet and all of its inhabitants. To then think that, okay, well, it's only waste from food industry animals that makes that's used in fashion production is definitely a kind of a misunderstood fact, because there's plenty of cases or situations where you hear of deforestation in the Amazon by cattle ranchers specifically for the production of leather in fashion goods and fashion products, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
For many of us, it's just an astounding fact that we are literally clearing land and rearing animals specifically for the production of things like leather handbags and shoes that, many of us don't draw that connection, but lots of us have leather products. And
right.
It's important to just raise that level of awareness for people, because I think many of us, if we knew, would do something about it.
Right. Absolutely. And so interesting too, you touched on fast fashion and ultra fast fashion, where I don't know really when the advent of fast fashion occurred, but I'm thinking back to when I was growing up in the 90s, often there was spring and winter, or like summer and winter, and those are the main two seasons that would come out for clothes. And today there's some of these fast fashion companies have like 40 seasons, which is crazy when you think about the fact that there's only 52 weeks in a year. That's changing your look and changing the trend and changing, what's happening and what's hot that frequently. There's just no way that that's sustainable.
That's right. And there's no way that it doesn't result in a lot of clothes being made that don't even leave the shop floor, because where is that going? And same with all of the clothes that we can access so frequently. 40 seasons, as you said, mean there's new items landing in shops every week. What are we doing with all the clothes that we're buying every week? Ultimately, some of that is not valued. Some of it doesn't even last because of the poor quality. And so it ends up in the bin.
Yeah. Well, that's a really great transition to my next question, which is, for anyone listening, what would you say is a simple individual shift that many consumers can take when it comes to their fashion consumption habits?
Yeah, I love this question because it's not all doom and gloom. A real underlying message at Good on You is that there are so many things that we can do, and if collectively we just do something small, we can really have a huge impact. And so, yeah, I encourage people to think that it is okay to start small. Sustainability is a pathway, it's a process. It takes time for industries to evolve and for us too. So just thinking about the issues and making a single commitment to do something is such a powerful place to start. I often suggest that people should hone in on what are the issues that they really care about. Is it protecting the people who made our clothes? Is it about protecting the animals and their right to welfare as well? And linked to that, maybe is it about being vegan? And so focusing in on a cause or an issue can help us decide what we want to do, what choices we want to make when supporting brands. Often the most sustainable thing you can do is not buying anything new, considering alternatives like repairing what's already in your wardrobe, swapping with friends can be a fun activity. And of course, buying secondhand. The whole thrifting market, resale market has really exploded, and there's so many great options out there of beautiful quality fashion that are still in circulation and that you can buy from someone else and use again and again. And of course, if you do want to buy something new, not to feel guilty about it, but just choose mindfully, choose brands that match those values that matter to you, so that you will care and cherish for that item over time.
Those are great tips, and ones that I hope our followers and listeners take to heart. I think starting with your personal values and what you value most is a great first step. So thank you for sharing those. And those are all great individual steps. But I guess, as it relates to all of those issues we talked about earlier, we do need large scale change across an entire industry that makes tons and tons and tons of money. So what do you think is it going to take to produce that large scale change? And how is a company like Good on You hoping to accelerate that change?
I think we need to realize that everyone has a role to play. So individual changes, as I was just saying, really do matter and together have huge power. So consumer power and consumer action has a big role to play here. Of course, governments are important too. The challenge there is there's so many jurisdictions that fashion operates in, and it's complex to get alignment, and often regulation just sets the bare minimum standard. So I think it's dangerous to just focus on regulation as a solution and wait around for governments to solve the challenges. And that really business, fashion brands, fashion manufacturers have a big chance to step up and to give consumers the sustainability information that they're looking for. Actually, we've just launched a new tool for brands called Good Measures that takes the Good on You rating system and breaks it down for brands so they can really understand where their impacts are today and get the support on how to improve. There are lots of other tools out there that also support industry. So tapping into the resources that people are building to address these real issues. And of course, we also love working with innovative platforms like Cluey. We also work with Microsoft, these platforms that are using ratings and ultimately helping consumers to choose better wherever they are, all over the world. Such a huge important part of the process of change.
I guess I'm curious, have you noticed an uptick in interest from brands who, want to meet this new and growing consumer demand?
Definitely. I mean, any good business responds to consumer demand. It did take some time. For a long while, acting on these issues was seen as a nice to have, as something to do on the side as part of corporate responsibility. But we're seeing more and more brands, platforms, retailers take action on sustainability because they see the commercial opportunity. They see that this is something that the consumers care about, and if they don't take action, they'll actually miss out on a huge part of the market. And so that's a good thing. I mean, business needs to be incentivized and motivated in the right way, and consumer demand, again, that goes to the core of what Good on You is all about, is so powerful. So definitely seeing more and more brands take action, more and more businesses looking to meet consumers where they're at.
Absolutely. And you can't argue with impacting the bottom line, because that's ultimately why businesses exist. So,
exactly.
So that's great. And that, hearing that makes me so hopeful for the future of the fashion industry. And I guess, before we move into the end of our podcast here, my final question in the meat of our show is, do you have hope for the future of the fashion industry?
Of course, I have hope. I wouldn't be working so hard and so passionately with my team for so many years if I didn't see a huge opportunity for a more positive future. Since we've started, as I was just saying, we have seen so many more brands take action and engage consumers on these issues. We also have the privilege of seeing so many new brands pop up every day, building their businesses from the ground up with these principles of responsibility and sustainability at their core. And even the biggest fast fashion brands like Zara and H&M, they all have started pouring huge amounts of resources into sustainability initiatives and policies and teams. Of course, there still is a long way to go. Our ratings highlight that. But there is hope, and that's why we need to keep pushing for change.
Well, that's awesome. And, continues to be such an inspiration for any conscious consumer out there who's listening, as well as for myself at Cluey. So Sandra, thank you for the time on the podcast. We always love to end our show with 2 glimmer of hope questions. Speaking of hope, the first glimmer of hope question we like to end the podcast with is, what is a new innovation, maybe specific to the space that you focus in, so fashion, in the world of impact, that you're particularly jazzed about right now?
First thing that comes to mind, maybe not entirely new, but I think this idea of circular business models is really changing up the way we think about impact. Impact used to be about reducing or offsetting our footprint, and how we change productions so that we're doing less. And a lot of businesses struggle to align with that model because everything is based on this idea of growth. So circular fashion flips that on its head, and it's more about how we change the traditional linear make waste model into actually making something of value out of waste. Maybe producing less waste, sure, but also thinking about how we can change the outputs of fashion and put it back into the system. And tied to that is a whole generation of materials that are emerging, next-gen materials, often referred to like leather that is made out of food scraps, which, I think just has some really exciting potential to turn fashion production on its head.
Yeah, absolutely. I just came across an Instagram ad on my Instagram the other day of a fashion brand that's producing leather goods out of cactus leather. So that is pretty cool to hear about those new materials and to hear about, more brands embracing circularity. So the second question, glimmer of hope question, is actually if you're okay to rapid fire name 3 impact focused brands that you personally absolutely love and potentially buy products from, and what is it that they make?
I find this really hard because there are so many. We've rated over 5,000 brands, and we're discovering new brands all the time that are doing cool things in sustainable fashion. I'll try to be quick. Speaking of circular fashion models, there's a US brand called Unspun that we work with that creates made-to-order customizable jeans that fit perfectly, avoid unnecessary waste. It's a brilliant model and a brilliant brand.
And that's called Unspun. I just want to make sure I got that right.
Yeah.
Unspun. Okay, got it.
Another cool brand, since most of us are wearing more activewear these days, I wanted to shout out to Girlfriend Collective, also US brand. They're different in that they're all about embracing diversity and size inclusivity, but still have environmental sustainability as an important part of their processes too. They use a lot of recycled materials to produce activewear, which is quite rare.
That's great.
And third one, last but not least, a brand closer to home and that I have a lot of items in my wardrobe from is called ABCH, a Melbourne-based brand. A real focus on slow quality, seasonless items you can wear again and again. They use lots of organic materials. They work closely with their suppliers all the way down the chain and trace and report on every input to the very source. And we actually rate them 5 out of 5 for their impacts on people, planet, and animals.
Wow. Well, I can't wait to check out all three of those brands. And I knew that of all the podcast guests we've ever had on this show, that would probably be the hardest question for someone like you, given how many brands you've been exposed to and had the opportunity to rate. So thank you for answering that excellently. Sandra, just thank you so much for coming on our podcast to get our followers clued in on the topic of a sustainable future for fashion.
Thank you so much for having me, for listening to what I have to say, and for collaborating with us on this important issue. I feel really blessed to be here. Thank you.
Of course. And thank you again to all of our listeners for tuning into today's episode. Don't forget to come back next time to get clued into the latest in the world of conscious consumerism.